This program contains scenes that some viewers may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Jones, host of Perspectives, a public affairs show normally seen at this time on Rogers State University Public Television. Today, we're going to step out of the confines of our regular format to bring you a special edition. The reason for the change is we have a guest who lives quietly in Tulsa who yet played a role in one of the darkest chapters of world history ever recorded. I invite you to come along with me as we meet and hear a woman whose life experiences stand as a warning to future generations, and one who will forever wear the title, The Survivor. As I said, one of history's darkest chapters came at the hands of German dictator Adolf Hitler. Under his direction and by his direct orders, over 6 million men, women, and children and babies were slaughtered. The majority of them were Jews, 6 million people. For some, forced labor just prolonged their death, but when they became too weak to help achieve Hitler's goal of world domination, they were executed. Nazi death camps dotted the landscape of Germany, where the majority of these deaths occurred. Our guests today are Drew Diamond, Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Tulsa, and Eva Unterman, a survivor of this mass slaughter. I want to say welcome to both of you. It's good to have you here. Drew, I want to start with you. As I talk with Eva, though, I want you to feel free to jump into the conversation and be a part of it. The Holocaust, how could it happen? How could it take place and so many people be slaughtered without the world involvement?
Well, it's a simple answer to a complex world situation. People became bystanders. They became bystanders to the history that was happening in front of them, to the atrocities that were taking place and were going to take place. And by people not paying attention, whether it be in Germany at the time, at the rise of Hitler, or in Europe at the time, and certainly in America at the time. And that sense of watching bad things happen and taking no action quickly, it results in terrible outcomes for everybody.
Certainly, Adolf Hitler made his mark early. And there were those who predicted that Hitler would, in fact, sweep Europe in a manner that no one had ever seen before. Today, we know for a fact that it happened. There's no question about it. How can this world continue to turn with people, and there are many of them, who deny it ever took place?
Well, that phenomena of Holocaust deniers has been with us since the end of World War II. I can't speak to the reason why they do it. I can speak to the fact that the energy they put into denying the Holocaust is the same energy that's put in creating a Holocaust. And so it's people who do that who become, in the end, in my mind, as dangerous as those that actually perpetrate crimes in this world.
In the first place.
Yes, because to deny history, to deny what's clearly happened in front of us, is to say, I'll support it if it happens again.
You and I have been friends for many years. I'm going to ask you pointedly, could it happen again?
Sadly, certainly it could. Yeah, the world becomes dangerous to all human beings as we go back to my original thought about being bystanders. If you look around today and you see things, and we all see things happening that are not only dangerous to the individual, but dangerous to communities and dangerous to the world at large. And we sit still for it, hoping it will go away. At the end, it only gets worse.
Eva, I, in many ways, want to embrace you. Please consider yourself embraced.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to be with us and to speak of your time.
I appreciate your interest and will be glad to answer whatever question I'm able to.
Thank you. Let's go back through the years. Do you remember the time when you were with your father and mother and the Gestapo came calling?
I remember it
Tell us
quite
about it.
well, yes. Well, it was 1939, September 1939, when Germany invaded and occupied Poland. And I lived in a large Polish industrial city called Lodz, L-O-D-Z. My father was in business. I had a happy childhood. And unbeknown to me, while we were vacationing that summer, there were rumors that perhaps there was some talk of war or Germany. I was almost 7 years old and of course didn't understand any of it. But we returned to Lodz from our vacation in a hurry, and within days our lives were changed forever, which I did not understand at that age. But there were German soldiers in the street of Lodz. Unlike Warsaw, Lodz was not bombed. They just simply moved in, and the Polish military tried to protect its country, but they were no match for the mighty German panzers. And there were German soldiers in the street and would come up to our home and take whatever they wanted. I recall a couple of these men, and they were not Gestapo, they were not SS. Those were Wehrmacht still, the German soldiers. But they came and took the chandelier over the dining room table that was hanging there, and we were helpless. We suddenly lost all our rights. We were at the mercy of the Nazi occupation.
What do you remember about the time they took you? What happened?
When I was taken? Okay, it was winter 1940 when we were told what day, what time to assemble in our downstairs, carry only that with us which we could. In other words, we had to leave everything else behind, and my mother made these bundles out of sheets. We walked out of our home. We had no choice. They were soldiers with guns and big dogs. And I recall very well how it felt to leave home. It was cold, and Mother put as many clothing pieces on me as I could possibly wear to maximize that which we could take and to keep me warm. And we met other neighbors, and we walked. We were made to walk towards one direction, not on sidewalks. That was already not allowed even before this transport, and
So
we
the
walked.
Jews couldn't use the sidewalk?
We could not use the sidewalks. I wasn't allowed to start school, which I was looking forward to. I wasn't allowed to play with my non-Jewish friends. I wasn't allowed to play in the park. My father wasn't allowed to go to his business. It was all changed. Everything was confiscated. And I often ask young people when I speak to them, how would you feel to leave everything behind? Your baby pictures, your grandma's china, everything left behind, and walk out.
So they had you in the street.
That's right.
What happened then? They took you to camp?
We walked for a long time, not knowing where to. And we arrived in an old, dilapidated part of Lodz, which became the Lodz ghetto. A ghetto was a prison with barbed wire, and we were taken, that is mother, father, my two grandmothers, and I, to a dilapidated old building, made to go upstairs. I remember the rickety stairs, to a room where we and several other people would have to live. And my mother, who made the best of any bad situation, immediately found an old cot in that room, dusted it off, pulled out from her bundle sheets, a pillow, and a blanket, and that became my bed for 4 years while we lived in the ghetto.
You were there for 4 years, but you
Yes.
wound up eventually at Auschwitz.
Correct.
Were you with your mother and dad at Auschwitz?
Well, I was on a very unusual transport, which is now actually studied and researched. I was with, well, how shall I say? Do you want me to tell you how we got to Auschwitz? Which most people have seen, those cattle cars. We were told to go to the train station, and there was the train, unlike any I have seen, with these red wagons, and we were made to go inside. They packed us as tight as possible. Mother, dad, my grandma. I meant to say that one grandma died before, but anyway, and there we were, standing tight against each other. I don't know for how long. You could hear some people praying. You could hear children crying. Eventually, the door was locked, metal hitting metal, and I remember that sound to this day.
Do you remember offloading at Auschwitz?
Oh, yes. I remember also as we were traveling, the sound of the steam engine whistle. And it seemed to me like forever. And then we arrived in a place which the adults heard rumors about. Of course, I had no idea where we were.
How old were you at this point?
I was 11 years old, almost 11, I think. As clearly as I remember the events, dates and calendar, had no meaning to me. But as we stopped, the doors were open, and there were SS men with their big dogs and screamed at us, "Raus, schnell, get out, get out." I no longer saw my father, but I stayed with my mother. And we were made to run towards the left. There were all these people in these striped-like pajamas. It was a shock. I had no idea where I was, but mother kept tight hold of my hand. And we went to a large building where we were to be processed, which meant all the women, a few children. We had to take all our clothing off. They shaved my hair, and then we were made to go into another room where there were shower heads overhead. And I had no idea how lucky we were then, because water descended on us. A similar building built, I believe, to the same specifications, where the old, the sick, and the children were taken. But instead of water, poisonous gas came down on them. And then their bodies were built in ovens that were built for that purpose, that burned day and night. And I remember the smell in the air. We were in Auschwitz-Birkenau.
I want to stop you for just a moment, because something unusual happens here at this point in your life. You had a Schindler in your life, did you not?
Well, in a way, yes. That's a very good comparison, yes.
Did you know who this person was?
I didn't know at that time, but I have since found out. And it's a long story. I don't know if I can go into it, but we were on the list to go to a metal factory in Germany. My father had connections, and we were on a list of the metal factory that was run by a German. His name was Hans Bieboff, and a Jewish administrator who put us on this life-saving list. 250 women and some children, 250 men. But we arrived in Auschwitz just the same.
How long were you at this particular camp, Auschwitz?
In Auschwitz, a short time. But then we were transferred to another camp, less well known, but every bit as brutal, and that was Stutthof on the Baltic. And if I have time, I'll be glad to tell you a bit of a routine that,
Certainly.
okay. We were taken into these barracks. Most people who have visited museum or perhaps been in Poland, they were as far as you can see barracks, low barracks. We were given, there were bunks, they were really like shelves that we slept on. And very early, we were told to go outside. We just had those pajama striped uniforms and wooden shoes, and were given a metal bowl into which our daily soup portion was poured. Consisted of turnips, potato peels, and water. No spoons, mind you. We were not considered human. Animals don't eat with spoons.
How long were you held?
Several months. We stayed in Stutthof, where my grandmother, my mother's mother, Jochevet Kaffemann, was murdered. And mother and I stayed together, and eventually we were sent to a metal factory in the German city of Dresden.
Where was your father? Were you
At that point, we weren't sure. There were some rumors that the men were traveling the same destination, but we never, were in contact with them.
At what point were you reunited?
After the bombing of Dresden, which we survived in the basement of the factory, because mother and I worked night shift. The bombing of Dresden is well documented, and I have spoken in Germany to German students about it. I won't go into that. War is hell, and many innocent people lost their lives in Dresden. But I told the German students, had Germany not invaded, occupied, tortured many people in all the European countries, the British and the Americans would not have come and bombed Dresden.
You know, one of the things that keeps screaming out at me, and I've mentioned this to Drew, when the Allied forces moved in following D-Day, and they would come into these camps, find what few survivors there were, and see the countless dead of all ages, they were absolutely taken aback. No one seemed to know anything about it.
There was a veteran, World War II veteran in Tulsa. His name was Cliff Michaels. And he, wherever we spoke about the Shoah, the Holocaust, he would join us and tell the public, the students, what he saw when he was taken to Buchenwald, which was the American the American soldiers. I was liberated by Russian soldiers.
When you were finally liberated, how old were you?
I was 12. But I also should tell you, if I have time, that after the bombing of Dresden, they walked us, the remnants of what we were, which lasted, I didn't know then, 11 days and nights, what is now known as a death march. We walked along the river Elbe and ended up in Terezin, where on May 8th, 1945, we were liberated.
At what point were you and your father and mother reunited?
I was with my mother all the time, very unusual. And my father was also brought to Terezin, where we were eventually reunited. He was very ill, but we were together.
We only have about 4 minutes, Eva, and I'm sorry, there's so many things
I'm sorry.
I want to ask you about. No, don't, you're fine. There are so many things I want to ask you, but I do want to bring up one subject. There were thousands of children that were never reunited.
That's right.
Many of those children died at the hands of the Nazis. Did you see any of these children?
I have not seen any child in the camps. I wasn't supposed to be there either. So those few children who survived our transport and came out of Auschwitz, we didn't see each other. I had no idea. But I have since, of course, I know that about 1.5 million Jewish boys and girls were killed, And the reason that I'm speaking with you now and to students in Tulsa and other places is to remember them. That's a very strong obligation that I have, to remember the children.
As you remember back, when your father and mother and you were together again, were your parents the same?
Were they what?
Were they the same? Were they changed at all?
You know, the killing stopped in 1945. Our stories did not. Nothing was the same. We were different. Everything and everybody. I mean, the chaos that followed liberation and what was happening in Europe, in Germany, many of the people who went back home to Poland were not welcomed by their former neighbors, who stole much of the stuff before the Nazis ever got there. Nothing was ever the same.
How much longer did it take you to discover who your Schindler was?
Actually, quite a while. But I must tell you that my Schindler, his niece came to see me a few years ago in Tulsa.
Really?
Yes, she lives in Cleveland. Her uncle put us on the list. His name was Alfred Chimovich.
Amazing story.
It is.
An amazing story. All right, I will ask you. We have 2 minutes. I wish we could go further on this, but I have to ask. All you've been through, all that you and Drew know about, I asked Drew, could it happen again?
I think so. Not necessarily the same way. This is still the United States, but tragedy is happening all over the world. What happened to us was on the back, printed about, back page of some newspapers. I watch in real time when different children in different countries are tortured, are killed, the parents lose their kids. Unfortunately, that happened not that long ago, our own country. We must be vigilant. We have to protect our democracy. And one other reason I speak about it is to warn the future generations of what we humans are capable of doing to one another.
I don't want you to get political. I don't mean to have you get political, but I have to ask.
Sure.
What are your feelings when you hear of parents and children being separated at our southern border?
I was stunned and still have a difficult time to believe this. I'm a naturalized citizen. I'm an American. I cannot believe that this sort of thing can happen in the United States of America, that I really love. This is not what our country is about.
Drew and I were talking earlier about the fact that they were starting to tattoo the children.
It's mind-boggling, mind-boggling. This has to stop.
It
has to stop now.
We are at a point where I have to stop. Thank you both for taking time to visit with us.
Thank you, Sam.
We're so indebted
Thank
to
you
both.
very much. Thank you so much.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Perspectives. In closing, I want to remind you of Drew and Eva's answers when I asked the question, could it happen again? Now, as I close, I got to ask you, think about it. Could it happen again? The answers being seen in demonstrations around the world. Should we be paying attention?